In part 3 of our Introduction to the Difference Inclusive Leadership course, a group of head teachers share some of the challenges they're experiencing, and we discuss how the Inclusive Leadership course could support their response. Anything. So, yeah, I don't know, has anyone got any kind of questions about some of the thinking that underpins the course, or some of the structure and kind of way that the course is delivered, and otherwise I can finish by talking about next steps for you and for your schools as well. Graham, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, John. That was really useful, really interesting, and it certainly it perhaps obviously ties in with the developing thinking that we're doing in school and we're hearing about elsewhere. Talked about Northumberland's initiative through the HINT team. I was at a conference the other week where Dave Whitaker was speaking, and I think he might be sitting on the trust board or something around the difference. I'm not sure, but anyways, he's very much a promoter of the relational behaviour management approach. So there's a lot of things coming together, I think. It was interesting. You focused very much on the reduction of exclusions and on the continuum, and increased inclusivity. We didn't talk about, if you like, standards across the school, and we're very clear that we have to see high standards of engagement behaviour, focus on learning, all of that. To some extent, we feel that we are embracing a relational approach with vulnerable young people, but we're really struggling for them to adhere to high standards around behaviour. And can you draw a link between the work that you're doing, the reduction of exclusion, because you can reduce exclusion very easily, but that might see a rise in poor behaviour. Can you point very clearly to improvements in both areas?
Yeah, and it's a shame that we haven't got. I was hoping Paul was going to make it. Paul Johnson from Churchill was going to make it to talk about his experience at Churchill, because he would very much kind of reflect that. So I suppose one thing that, if it didn't come across clearly, then there's a great opportunity to kind of like re-emphasize it. We totally expect that schools will have really clear systems around their response to challenging behaviour. It's an important part of messaging expectations and sustaining kind of big communities. And what we want to see is how improved, particularly around kind of relational practice, how improved relational practice supports that approach rather than is seen as a substitute for it. I'll give two little examples. So if I run a longer session, we do quite a bit more thinking about the practice and systems framework. And one of the things that I would say is I see a lot of policies in schools, including behaviour policies, lots of different policies. And what I would tend to see is often it being so I see sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish between practice and systems in those policies. They become kind of blurred. But actually, more often than not, I see policies which are primarily articulating systems. And they're articulating great systems. They're articulating really clear and very understandable systems. But there's a risk, particularly in relation to behaviour policies in that way, that we encourage staff to develop a practice of sorts, which is articulating the system. So that becomes my practice, to articulate the system. And there's a risk in that form of practice, if we want to call it that we're always kind of escalating situations, because that practice will often involve articulating what someone is doing, why it's wrong, what is expected for them to do, and what's going to happen if they don't do it. And we're by doing that, we're often putting ourselves in a position where we're always one step further along the continuum. And actually, what can support that is a genuine practice that sits between steps of the system that actually supports staff to sustain the incident at one stage, and ideally kind of reduce escalation and re-regulation of students. So actually we're not in a position where we're moving between the steps. So the steps are you know, they're a really important part, but actually a genuine craft and practice that sits between them, I think, is a really important part of that. Mm-hmm. And another example, I guess so I think restorative practice is a really valuable thing, you know, but I don't accept this kind of, that's often kind of put out there, that there's some sort of kind of false dichotomy where you've either got to have, if you have sort of a restorative approach, you're essentially having a permissive approach and no kind of sanction-based system. And for me, the two go hand in hand. And when we do our restorative practice session, we're really interested in thinking about every level of your kind of behavior system, and what does the kind of parallel element of reintegration and restore look like alongside whatever it is you are doing as part of the sanctioning. Because actually really successful restore after a sanction is much more likely to reduce the chances of just an instant repeat, particularly when it's an escalation that's happening because of a personal relationship that staff and students are developing over time. So I hope that
that was
your question. You know, we've got schools and mats, I guess, from every end of the spectrum. From like, you know, we're fully kind of restorative, and that, you know, you might look at them and you would say that's not our type of school. And we have Dixon's and AET and a whole bundle of other kind of mats who have mat-wide kind of approaches that I think are, you know, are pretty kind of rigid. And the exciting thing about being in the room is navigating those different approaches and supporting all of them to take learning and use it to improve what you want to do in your school, rather than saying there's this way and there's only this way, and if you can't do that or you don't agree with it, then we're out. I'm more interested in working with schools that are further away from, you know, what might seem initially as like a sort of inclusive relational way, than I am with schools who would consider themselves to be super. It's great to work with them, don't get me wrong, but actually, like, that's not part of the work that we're trying to do. But we're doing that hopefully by creating a space that doesn't feel judgmental, threatening, kind of, you know, it's an inclusive space, like come as you are, I guess, is, you know, to coin a lyric from a song, and you know, and find and challenge what you don't like, because, you know, it's there to be challenged every session as well.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Sean, thank you. And then if Grace doesn't mind, just one other quick question is maybe more for Andrew, because I know you've spoken with those in NCC, but given that Northumberland are moving forward with in similar territory with a pilot programme, have you looked at ways in which there might be a kind of a dovetailing rather than both trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, this is very much the start of that discussion with Sue and team there. So we thought we'd do this, see how this panned out, and then we'd have some more discussions about how we can do that for sure. Yes. Yeah.
And the support, Andrew, that North of Tyne are bringing to this is presumably about funding and enabling access to the programme.
Exactly. Yes, yeah. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose two things just to pick up on that. Yeah, I spoke at length the other week with the leads from Northumberland in order, I suppose, because they wanted to be clear about whether or not what was going to be delivered would either conflict with or be repetitious of. And I think their view was that, which is sort of one of the main purposes of the course, that developing leadership expertise in this area in schools is a really important kind of component of wider work that they want to do. You know, I would sometimes be a bit critical where local authorities are kind of bolting on lots of different bits of training for schools and hoping that somehow that will stick without leadership expertise that really makes sense of it and supports it to translate into what's really valuable from that training in my school. And that's what I hope we're going to get. And I mean that probably answers that. Tracy, did you have any questions as well?
I don't necessarily have some questions, but just a comment really, because just what you've said there I find quite reassuring. And the reason I find it reassuring is this: in where we are, this school was out of control. I mean, out of control 4 years ago. It was dangerous. This school is a calm, orderly environment where children feel safe and want to learn. And we've done that through some serious and significant holding the line of, these are our expectations and you have to meet them. And if you don't, there are these consequences. And, you know, that list you showed is there. We recognise that we cannot continue, and we've recognised for a while, you can't continue to bounce children between reward and sanction and expect any behaviour in the middle to shift. You've got to do something else in the middle to shift those behaviours, and that's what we talk about. My horror is when it comes in that the shift is, it starts to feel like you're just handing over everything where there are no consequences for behaviours and actions when there needs to be. So what you've just said there really helps me to actually think, actually, there might be a way forward where we can learn and learn that there is a different way, or there is a complementary way to put things into that process where, and interesting, you talk about a behaviour policy as a reflection of the system. I think that's very much where we are. But what we've put around that now are our learning behaviours and our scaffolded approach to how children meet those sanctions. So for one young person, and this is just a minor example, they cannot go into our internal exclusion and do a whole day off, you know, in one go. Our sanction is you have to do a whole day. So we separate it out. That's worked extremely well. And then we've put in supported behaviours and supported deregulation zones, re-regulation zones that actually help them not to get there. But we need more expertise around that. So I think this is quite exciting.
That's really great to hear, Tracy, and it makes me think of two things. So one is that there's a real value, I think, although it comes with challenges, because there is a very understandable, I think, discomfort that lots of staff will feel about a shift in potentially expectations of them and their engagement, sometimes either during or after things have been challenging. But that's not to say there isn't the kind of consequences, and that remains. But a big part of the course is thinking about what does taking staff on that journey look like. How do we make it safe to start engaging in some change of practice for staff? And one of the ways that we do that is we take that kind of interactions drive outcomes model, and we encourage leaders to start at quite a granular level about picking some really specific, in some ways actually kind of low stakes interactions that we want to develop practice in, and using the kind of and a lot of acknowledgement that scripting and scaffolding is an incredibly important part of going on a practice journey, that we might want to become principled practitioners at some point, where our practice is just part of who we are. We take it into every interaction. But actually, there's some problems with that, because your principled practitioners are can be pretty daunting to look at and intimidating. Like, what I could never do that. And also, like, well, what's the point of me doing that? Because like they'll do it. So that beginning point and that confidence and security is really important. But also the granularity and the kind of low stakes initially, like, yeah, is an important part of the professional development planning and learning from. So as an example, got a school that was really interested in improving attendance, particularly improving attendance of students who were at risk of PA. And what they did was they developed a new kind of practice around the first interaction that students would have with every member of staff the day that they came back from an absence for that cohort. And they thought really hard about what that interaction could message and what it would look like and feel like to authentically make someone feel welcome to come back into the school, like they were valued, that they had a sense of belonging, and that they weren't ratcheting up the stakes of what you've missed and making, you know, a compounding kind of anxiety about absence. And they had really great success with that cohort because they were going around the school and having variations on that kind of interaction 10, 15, 20 times across a number of days that they came back. And it was really improving the likelihood that they would stick for a number of days across the week and increasing their attendance. And but that's pretty low stakes. Like, we're talking about regulation and we're talking about practice, but we're not necessarily starting somewhere that feels really, really uncomfortable and too far away. That was their choice. That wasn't, again, like, we're not in the business of like saying what you need to do in your school is. We're really interested to kind of be guided by and support schools themselves. Hattie. Hi, Hattie.
Hello. Sorry, I just had to pop out to deal with a student. I was just going to say, Tracy, just on the back of what you were saying. So I've done some work on our behaviour policy for the school with this kind of in mind, because we obviously want to retain the standards and have the expectations, but also we want to shift to this relational approach. So when I was pulling together the policy, I was looking at lots of different literature, and I think in terms of the pitch to staff and also to parents and students is really about emphasizing our shift in our day-to-day interactions, a bit like what Sean was saying earlier on. So the kind of underpinning of the day-to-day chats to students, lesson interactions, etc., but very much caveated by, however, this is our profile, this is what we want. We acknowledge that X person might need X adjustment to get there, but I think I did a CPD session to staff a couple of weeks ago just to kind of drop the idea in, just to get a sense of, you know, this is where we're going, and read the room a little bit. And I would say the feedback that I've had from staff is much more positive than I anticipated. Like, I've had quite a lot of people come to see me to say, this sounds really exciting, like I'm really up for this, and not dismissing it in the way that I kind of expected. I thought some people might be a bit like, oh, what, we're just getting rid of the rules, we're being too fluffy, we're being too woolly, that kind of thing. And that's definitely not the way that people seem to be approaching it, which I think is positive. So I mean, I think, you know, you're always going to get variability, aren't you, in terms of individuals and things like that. But I think the way that I've tried to put together the policy is around tiered intervention. So almost like tier 1 is this relational approach for all, and then it escalates up with different levels of intervention, sort of similar to that graph that you had earlier on, Sean, in terms of different levels of need. So I think it is very important, that weaving together of the relational and the practical things that we need from students.
And thanks very much, Hattie. That's really great to hear that. That, I guess, and your anticipated kind of, maybe a bit kind of, anxious about like how this is going to land, actually has proven to be more positive than you expected, which is a really great foundation for starting to kind of maybe not necessarily like ratchet it up, but actually start to get some pretty deep work going in areas that feel kind of safe for staff. There's a little video clip which is in the kind of like body of the information that Andrew would have sent out, and it's on the website of Habib Hussain, who's a deputy head of an AET school in London, talking about the massive reduction in suspensions in his school, who have not changed like their behaviour system, but have gone from kind of 160 plus suspensions last year to 16 this year, without and there being I think he said yesterday that it's a 40% reduction in intern exclusion. So he hasn't just buried his suspensions in intern exclusion, and he would put that down to two things. So they were really interested in taking some of the kind of understanding of trauma-informed practice, but actually a kind of practical manifestation of it. So we think that zones of regulation, which is something that is often thought of as being like a primary school thing or an SEN thing. We've seen some really great evidence of schools, secondary schools, developing it at a whole school level to essentially start to create emotional literacy, not just for students, but actually for staff, and for there to be a way of talking about emotions and dysregulation that is really quite productive. So introducing that sort of school-wide and starting to have much more kind of nuance and interest in different sorts of restorative meeting from different tiers and levels on their kind of behaviour system. He would say those two things that he's taken from the course. I mean, I think he's taken other stuff that has been interesting, but like, you know, weaving those two things in has been absolutely key to that massive change in suspensions. And his like feedback from staff survey at the end of the year was positive. Like, it wasn't, you know, things have gone to rack and ruin. We aren't, you know, what, you know, and kids are not being suspended. And like, you know, there's a generally pretty positive engagement with that. And I mean, this has turned out to be, thanks so much all for staying beyond potentially what you maybe anticipated staying. Hopefully this is going to make for a reasonably interesting kind of watch for people, because your discussion questions and challenges really added to probably questions that other people might have had, and now they don't need to necessarily ask. What I would say in terms of next steps is, Andrew at the minute has obviously has your contact details, and he potentially could, if it needs to be at the top of your inbox, resend you the kind of like, here's some info about the course and here's the link to apply. And I would really like to get the kind of North Tyne CA applications in from those leaders by the end of next week, because we're trying to get a venue through Andrew, and until we know roughly how many people we're going to have, it's a bit hard to kind of find and book that venue. It's a really short application form that needs to be done by the leader ideally, but it could be done by you if you wanted to just fill it out on their behalf. And then I would ask, and then I'd flagged one other. So that would be great if particularly Tracy and Graham, that is, you know, interest. Hattie's already in the room, so Hattie can potentially just go off and do that. We have had really good work and a kind of improvement from schools that put 2 leaders on. And what we did with North Tyne is North Tyne Learning Trust, who have kind of set this up, is they are funding in a similar way to Andrew the whole price of one place, and then we have significantly discounted a kind of subsequent place. And I would be really happy to do that in your schools if you thought that actually having more than one leader was a good thing. And in that case, in the case of Churchill College, Paul, the head teacher, came along, and he came along with his assistant head. And I think they're two quite sort of different, like, I'm looking at the whole school and I'm really looking at like this bit of work, and the work they then did together, but also with their SLT, I think is what really kind of ultimately sold it to North Tyne Learning Trust, who have put like a massive chunk of investment into bringing all of their leaders into that. So yeah, I mean, Tracy, I don't know if you have a question about that.
I was going to ask that very thing. The things that we have done, we have always sent 2 leaders, and we have found that has made the biggest difference in any kind of implementation and development, because on your own you can't talk about it. There's no bouncing ideas, there's no really getting to grips with it. I think for something like this, it would need to be me and the assistant head who leads on this, because if this doesn't come from the top, if you like, and cascade through everything, the poor assistant head is going to be beating their head against a brick wall, because I'm going to go, I know, but I'm too in, no. Do you see it? And that's not going to work. So I would really, really value being able for me and our assistant head to participate in this if this is something that we decide to go forward with. But for us, that's significantly depending on the kind of funding we can pull in, and that's just the reality of we're skint. It's the reality of where we are.
And I'll pick that up. I think I'll pick that up with Andrew afterwards in terms of but I would like to be able to support you to do that. And I think the other thing, just I guess to reassure you, Graham, and if that you're thinking that like this sounds interesting, but it doesn't sound like it's for me, is also that the biggest drive. So having a head teacher and is I would say like that's amazing, that's fantastic. But the single biggest driver of implementation and impact success from the course is how engaged the head teacher actually is. And that, you know, so maybe they are because they're on the course, but if they're not on the course, creating a space, for instance, within SLT for the leader to actually, after every single one of those half-term sessions, come back and do delivery about it. And yeah, the support that those head teachers, the support that a deputy head or an assistant head get is the transformative kind of thing to stop it being an amazing CPD experience for an individual, but basically it kind of stays in them and they get all the benefits and the school doesn't necessarily get the benefits from that. What I was also going to ask one last favour of both you, Graham, and you, Tracy, which is, and I might think about this with Andrew, but come back to you, and you might already have an idea, is I think the best people at this moment in time to persuade and encourage other leaders, other schools from your area to come and take up this, well, is generous and I think a really fantastic offer, is you, because there is no one that they will trust better than you, that this is actually something which is not threatening, it's not judgmental, and it could be really kind of beneficial and exciting. And in order, I guess, that you feel that there's a cohort of schools that are connected to you as part of it, I would make an ask and see how you feel about that, about being part of potentially the person who's actually, that if we put together a new kind of like email that goes with the video of today's session, that actually you send it out to your colleagues rather than it coming from me who they've never met, or Andrew who, you know, is hard to get away from having a kind of like supra, you know, authority kind of role, and therefore that comes with a kind of perception which is not always going to break through the kind of delete button as soon as the email pops up. Does that sound, would both of you be happy to join in that?
Very much so. And just picking up on your earlier point, Sean, I think certainly us here, we're absolutely sold on the principle, if that's the right term, and the way forward. In fact, you know, we've already committed, and as Hattie said, we're working on our policy to reflect the change that we'll bring into practice. So I think the question for us is, having started down a road with, for example, the HINT team, it's just whether we can combine the two. And I think from what you said, the two are mutually supportive of each other and not kind of exclusive. So I think it's, in my mind, and I'll have a chat with Hattie afterwards, but it's very much it's additional significant resource at the right level to help us take this forward. So that, you know, that sounds like a good thing. And as for sharing with other colleagues, more than happy to do that. I'm not sure, Tracy, when the next NASH meeting is. The time's running out. I don't know if we've got one before the holidays, but that's potentially an opportunity. I know you want something sooner than that, in which case we can certainly send something around by email and maybe speak directly to those that we work perhaps more closely with. So happy to do that, certainly.
That I mean, that in my experience is often the most impactful kind of conversation, is that, you know, you will have a group, I guess, of heads who you know, who trust you and your judgment, and that if you tell them this is going to be good, like, you know, we're doing this, and I would be really great to do that with you, particularly as it's funded. You know, when you're not trying to persuade them to even part with cash, you're trying to persuade them to come and you know, be part of a cohort. I mean, I just think that it would be great for you. Just to double check, are both of you Northumberland, Tracy? And yeah, So whether you work out who your kind of targets are, it would be great to have a cohort of Northumberland schools beyond the two of you.
You've got some Northumberland extremes here. You've got the west and you've got the very north. So we're pretty covered.
What I was going to say is Danielle, the colleague within the HINT team that we are working with, I think has 10 schools involved in the pilot for next year around trauma-informed practice and the relational approach. And you know, these schools in particular may well be, you know, well primed to be part of this if people can understand that it can work alongside and support the pilot initiative in Northumberland. But I know you've been in touch with Danielle, but that might be something to explore in terms of connecting with other schools that may well be interested.
Yeah, and what I would be very happy to do when it comes, I suppose, in terms of timelines and where we are in the year, it would be great if we could get that cohort applied by the end of next week, because that will help us just with the logistics of making this happen and getting people on board before the term starts. But I am more than happy to come and do the 20 minutes that I did in this, you know, a version of the start to all of the head teachers at the next secondary heads kind of gathering, and or to do less of it and just, like, you know, be open to question and answer if heads have that as well. Right, I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much for your time. It was really great to meet you, and I really appreciated, like, your thoughtful challenge and questions, because yeah, it's an important part of I guess building some trust around what it is that we do, and actually hopefully how it can work to support things that are really important to you in your schools. And looking forward, I mean, minimum, you know, however many colleagues hopefully you do persuade to join, I'm really excited to be working with both of you next year. Yeah, really looking forward to seeing you in person, Tracy. Exciting.
Okay.
We'll get that information back out to you, and I'll be able to share this recording with whoever needs it too.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks, Andrew, for setting up. Good to see you, Tracy.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. Cheers. Bye-bye.